So there have been a lot of statistics videos going around and you're probably bored of them, but I think they're fun, so I wanted to do one too. I don't think I did one last year. If I did, I will link it for you, but I'm pretty sure that I didn't. But this year I am, so here they are. So starting off with the basics, I read 155 books in 2019, which I'm super happy about. That broke down month by month into 8 books in January, 9 books in February, 12 books in March, 15 in April, 6 in May, 20 in June, 14 in July, 14 in August, 14 in September, 11 in October, 11 in November, and 21 in December. So December was the month that I read the most amount of books, and May was the month that I read the least amount of books. So going through the Goodreads statistics across the 155 books that I read a total of 61,563 pages, which is absolutely loads, and it seems like a bit of a boggling number, to be honest. The shortest book I read was How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss at 64 pages, and the longest book I read was Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson at 1,243 pages. My most popular read of the year was of course Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. That has also been read by 6,356,485 people just on Goodreads alone. And my least popular was Jelly by Claire Rees, which has only been read by 86 other people on Goodreads, which makes sense because it's a small press and a debut author with a very odd book. I did enjoy it, but it is a bit strange. My average rating was 3.9 out of 5 stars, which doesn't necessarily surprise me. I suppose probably 4 stars were my most popular rating this year, but we will get into that in a bit more detail shortly. And the book that is the highest rated on Goodreads that I read this year was actually Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, which is Stormlight Archive book 2, which has an average rating of 4.76 stars, which is a really high rating. It's really incredible, and it's very strange because that's actually my least favourite book in the series so far, so I clearly don't agree with the masses on that one. Way of Kings is definitely my favourite of the ones that are out so far. Have a quick comparison with my Goodreads statistics from last year, because like I said, I don't think I filmed one of these last year, so I don't have my own statistics to tell you about, but I read 75 books, so exactly half the, well, actually just a little bit more than half of the amount of books that I read this year, but I only read 29,902 pages across those 75 books, so I must on the whole have read longer books this year in general. Oathbringer was my longest book read last year as well, because I reread it this year, and my shortest book was Assassin Study by Maria V. Schneider, which is one of the short stories in the Chronicles of Ixia series. That one was only 15 pages. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban was the most popular book I read last year, and the least popular was 6 Degrees of Assassination by M.J. Aldridge, which is a BBC audiobook, and that was only read by 848 other people. Words of Radiance was still the highest rated book that I read last year. Again, I reread that one this year. So those are my Goodreads statistics, but I have done my own little spreadsheet as well, measuring a few different sorts of things, so I'm going to take you through those and put up some lovely graphs on the screen for you so you can enjoy that. So first off, before I get into the spreadsheets, I also want to mention that of the 155 books total that I read this year, I read 127 books for the first time, and 28 of the books that I read in 2019 were rereads. So I did a decent amount of rereading, actually, over 2 rereads a month on average. So I'm really, really happy with that because I really enjoy rereading, and mostly I did that through listening to audiobooks, which is something I will get to as well. In terms of the split between standalones and series, I read 105 books in total that were part of a series and 50 that were standalone books, which I was actually quite surprised by because I am usually a predominantly series reader, and clearly 2/3 of my reading this year were series and just a third were standalone books, but that's still more standalone titles than I sort of anticipated. So that's a pretty interesting one. I also was interested in seeing what the split of authors was in terms of male, female, multiple, because some books are written by multiple authors, and there's one book that the author is so private that we don't even know what gender they are. So on the screen you will see that I read 112 books written by female authors, 33 books written by male authors, 9 books written by multiple authors, and then, like I said, just the one where the author's gender is unknown. Now, I did check that there weren't any non-binary authors in here, and sadly there were not. Unfortunately, there aren't a huge amount of non-binary authors out there anyway, and it appears that I didn't read any books by non-binary authors in the year of 2019, but I am surprised considering how much fantasy I read, and we'll get to those statistics in a minute, how many female authors I read from this year. It's a significant number. It's more than the male, multiple and unknown put together. In fact, it's way over double that number. So I'm quite impressed and happy about that, because I feel like it's a real indication of the way that publishing is going, and especially publishing in the fantasy genre. So I would possibly like to even that out a little bit more in the future, but I'm really pleased to see that the skew is that way round and not the other way round, particularly given the genres that I tend to lean towards. Speaking of which, let's have a look at the proportion of books that I read in each genre. So here's a pie chart, but it's quite difficult to read, I think, so I'm going to take you through it. So I read 82 fantasy books. So as you see, that's still the vast majority of my reading this year. Again, over 50% of my reading this year, and that's why it's so impressive, I think, that the female author number is so high. After that, the next most read is science fiction, not particularly surprising to me, followed by contemporary, which is a significant improvement on years past where I didn't really read a whole lot of contemporary. I read 14 of those this year and 16 of science fiction. After that, it's manga at 12 books. Now, I appreciate manga is not a genre, it's a format, but I wanted to include it in this genre section for the purposes of tracking the level of manga that I'm reading, because it's much more spread across genres than some of the others, so I've left it in here. Again, I appreciate it's not a genre, it's a format, but we're just going to go with it. So I read 12 volumes of manga this year. Next down is dystopian novels at 8, and then graphic novels. Again, I appreciate that's not a genre, it's a format, but for the same reasons as manga, I wanted to track those independently. I suspect that the majority of graphic novels that I read were contemporary, and in the majority of manga that I read were fantasy. But graphic novels, I read 7 of those. I read 3 historical fiction, which I think is pretty good, considering that historical fiction has been a genre that I've stayed away from in the past. I read 6 romance, 2 horror, 1 magical realism, 3 mystery, and 1 non-fiction. So in terms of my goal for 2019 to read more broadly, I think I've 100% achieved that, and I'm really interested to see these figures. This is possibly my favourite piece of statistic work that I have looked at when I was preparing for this video, so I find that one really interesting, and the spread I'm really happy with. Moving on to looking at star ratings, so I have a nice funnel chart here. I gave out 43 5 stars, 58 4 stars, 48 3 stars, 5 2 stars, and 1 1 star. So as you can see, I really don't give 1 and 2 stars very often. I think that that's because I mostly know what kinds of things I'm going to like, and so it's unusual for me to pick up something that I'm likely to give a 2 star or a 1 star to, and I am hoping that in 2020 that number will go down even further, because I'm going to make a concerted effort to DNF in 2020 if I'm not enjoying something, which should mean mostly eliminating 2 star reviews, and hopefully I won't ever get to the point where I need to give a 1 star to a book. I don't often talk about star ratings on my actual channel, but I do rate all books on Goodreads, so if you're ever interested to see my star ratings of a book, you can go over to Goodreads to have a look at those. But I did just want to give this particular statistic in this video, given that I've referred to my average Goodreads rating being 3.9, and you can see why I've got significantly more 4 stars than any other types of reads, but I do also have more 3 stars than 5 stars, which is a shame. I hope that I can flip that the other way around in 2020, because it will mean that I've found some really incredible books in the year, and we all hope for that, don't we? I also was interested to look at the format that I read books in. Now again, I'm not including manga or graphic novels in this section because I included them in the genre section, but I did want to look at the difference between physical reads, audiobook reads, ebook reads, of which there really are not many, and multiple, because quite often I like to listen and read physically a book at the same time, especially if it's the kind of book that's going to be particularly emotional or atmospheric. I feel like it really adds to the book. So no real surprises here. I read 103 books physically, as in physical hard copy in front of me in my hands that I was reading from, and that figure doesn't surprise me at all, because that definitely is what I do predominantly in terms of reading. Most of those will be books that I own. Some of them will be library books, but I honestly think that that was probably about 2 or 3. I'm really bad at using my library. I use it a lot for audiobooks. So 35 of the books that I read this year I read on audio. So comparing that to the number of rereads I did 28 rereads this year, so they were pretty much all audiobook, and on top of that I did another 7 that were audiobook as well. So first time reads on audiobook were probably around 7 alongside the 28 rereads, for a total of 35 audiobooks listened to this year. 15 books I both listened to the audiobook and followed along in the physical book, and then only 2 books were ebooks. One of them was The Near Witch, which is the only 1 star review I gave this year, and you will see that book come up in another video very soon. And the other one was the advanced reader copy of Peace and Turmoil that I read right at the beginning of 2019 before the book's release. I do want to reread that one in 2020 in physical format, but my first read of it was in ebook. And those are all the statistics that I wanted to talk to you about. Are there any specific statistics and things that you like to keep track of in terms of your reading? I found putting this all together quite time consuming, but also quite satisfying in a very geeky kind of way, but I enjoyed myself, so I hope that this was interesting in some way. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks, bye!